The regular season is done, the finals are here, we are down to our last 8 teams for 2024. Storm, Panthers, Roosters and Sharks make up the top 4, whilst the Cowboys, Bulldogs, Seagulls and Knights make up the bottom half of the top 8. I'm going to go through each of those teams one by one, looking at how deep into the finals I think each one can go, and looking at their best 17s. And I'll end the video with my prediction of who wins this year's NRL Premiership. Starting off with the minor premiers, the Melbourne Storm. I mean, what do you even say about this side? Half of this team is made up of rough and tumble players who just couldn't really seem to take the next step at their former clubs. Nick Meaney, Josh King, Sean Bloor, Eli Katoa, Jerome Hughes, who, by the way, is obviously their key man as they charge towards this year's premiership. Hughes debuted in the NRL in 2013 for the Titans. He played 1 game for them, then 1 game for the Cowboys in 2016, before he was picked up by the Storm in 2017. And even then, it wasn't until 2019 that he was a consistent NRL first grader. His rise has been absolutely brilliant, and this year, more than any other year, he's carried the Storm on his back in the wake of injuries to the likes of Cameron Munster and Ryan Papenhuyzen. He's obviously a huge part of this best 17 for the Storm they've got, which is relatively stock standard. Papenhuyzen at fullback, on the wings you've got Will Warbrick and Xavier Coates, Howarth and Nick Meaney in the centres, of course that classic halves pairing of Jerome Hughes and Cameron Munster. Christian Welch I do have starting in the front row. I think his experience in the finals is invaluable. Harry Grant at hooker, Josh King partnering Welch in the front row, Sean Bloor, Eli Katoa the back rowers, Trent Loiero at lock. Then you've got a bench with the magnificent utility Tyron Wishart, and the front row rotation of Tui Kamakamisa, Nelson Asfa-Solomona and Alec McDonald. This is a side that can absolutely go all the way, and in my opinion, if they're not in a grand final come the end of the year, it's because something has gone very, very wrong. Then the current 3-time premiers, a side who you simply cannot write off no matter what. And despite showing a bit of shaky form come the back end of the season, the Panthers did finish where they needed to on the table, and we all know that once the final series starts, this side goes to a complete other level. Nathan Cleary is without a doubt their key man, specifically because there's a bit of an injury cloud over his fitness heading into the finals. His head coach and father, Ivan Cleary, said that there's, quote, a few hoops to jump through in order for him to prove his fitness for week 1 against the Roosters. And there is a chance that, because it's not an elimination game, they might not risk him. He will be fit for week 2 and beyond though, which for me has Penrith's best 17 looking like this. You've got obviously Dylan Edwards at the back, Sunia Taruva and Isaac Tungo on one edge, although there are a few defensive concerns over those two. They have played together for a while and do have finals experience. Paul Alamotti will partner Brian To'o, Jerome Luai and Nathan Cleary, the 3-time premiership winning halves combination, line up there at 6 and 7. Moses Leota and James Fisher-Harris in the front row with Mitch Kenny at lock. Scott Sorensen and the brilliant Liam Martin in the back row, and of course Isaiah Yeo at lock. As for the utility, Trent Tolau has been the preferred selection from Ivan Cleary in the last few weeks, so I'd back him to probably keep that position. Then you've got Lindsay Smith, Liam Henry and Luke Garner for your forward rotation beyond that. This team just oozes quality. It would be an extremely brave person to predict that they won't make a grand final and say that they're not a really, really good chance of making it 4 premierships in a row. Then you've got the Roosters, a side who I was pretty high on for most of this year, but season-ending injuries to the likes of Sam Walker, Brandon Smith, and probably Victor Radley mean that it'll take a pretty big effort to pick up the pieces and make a genuine assault on the premiership this season. I do have the Roosters below the Storm and Panthers, but probably a level above everyone else. To me, they're the only other side this season that's shown enough consistency to win 3 or 4 finals games in a row. Their key man is James Tedesco, without a doubt. Him and Sam Walker have been the 2 dominant players for the Roosters all season, and now with Walker out, it's on Tedesco to both increase his involvement without overplaying his hand. He's struggled with that balance in the past, but they cannot afford for him to get it wrong now. In terms of their best 17 for the finals, their back 5 is still intact, with James Tedesco obviously at fullback, Daniel Tupou and Dominic Young on the wings, and you've got Joseph Suoli'i and Joseph Manu in the centres. Luke Keary will partner Sandon Smith in the halves, Sandon Smith being a man who likewise has a lot of pressure on his shoulders to fill the boots of Sam Walker. Then you got Jared Warrior-Hargreaves in the front row for what will be his last final series of his career, partnering Lindsay Collins with Connor Watson at hooker. Angus Crichton and Sitili Tupanua will make up the back row with Nat Butcher, I think, starting at lock. For their bench utility, you've got the solid Zach Docker-Clay with the forward rotation of Siwa Wong, Nafahu White, and Premiership winner Spencer Leniu. They need to go up a gear if they want to beat the likes of the Storm and Panthers, but if there's any side in this competition that can do that, I think it's these guys. Next up, you've got the Cronulla Sharks, who were outright leaders of this competition in the early phases of 2024. But even a very poor middle part of the season couldn't stop them from securing a top 4 finish this year. To me, they're one of the more well-oiled sides in this competition. I mean, obviously they do have a star man, that man being Nicho Hynes. But aside from that, they do just have a consistently good squad. They have been inconsistent at various points throughout this year, but their final round win at Brookvale Oval against the Seagulls was very impressive. And if they can carry that form through to the final series, they're going to be a very, very tough side to beat. It goes without saying though, I think their hopes do rest on the shoulders of Nicho Hynes. He is a bit of a confidence player, and at times this season he has struggled for that confidence. But if he can be at his best in this final series, that's where the Sharks can become really, really dangerous. It'll take some pretty remarkable form from him to make them a genuine premiership threat, but that is something that he's capable of doing. Their 17 has been super consistent pretty much ever since Craig Fitzgibbon came into the club, so not too many surprises in my best 17 here. You got Will Kennedy at fullback, Sione Katoa and Ronaldo Mulatalo on the wings. There is a bit of an injury cloud over Jesse Ramian. We saw him go off against the Seagulls, but at time of recording, there's no reports on how long he'll be out for, so I have put him in there alongside Kyle Iro at centre. Braden Trindle and Nicho Hynes obviously make up the halves, Toby Rudolph and Oregon Kalfusi in the front row, with Blake Brayley at hooker. Britton Nickera and Teague Wilton make up the back row, with leader Cameron McInnes at lock. Then as for the bench, Craig Fitzgibbon tends to go with a 4-forward bench, especially considering Sifa Talakai does provide a little bit of versatility there. So I've gone with Jack Williams, Braden Hamlin-Uele, Royce Hunt, and that man Talakai. Honourable mention to Tom Hazelton, who would absolutely be in the 17, but it looked like he was injured pretty significantly against the Manly Seagulls, and I don't think that he will be back for this final series. As I said, this is a genuinely well-oiled team, and if they do end up making a real imprint and potentially being a dark horse to make the grand final, it wouldn't shock me all that much. Moving out of the top 4 now, in 5th place we've got the North Queensland Cowboys. Now these guys, like the Sharks, have been inconsistent at various points this season, and to be honest, halfway through the year I did not think that they would finish as high as 5th place. But they do seem to be peaking at the right end of the year. I was out at Olympic Park last week to see them play the Bulldogs, and they absolutely put the cleaners through them. It was ruthless, relentless, and while the Bulldogs were far from their best, you can only play who's in front of you, and they played. Picking a key man for them was a little bit tough. I was very torn between Scott Drinkwater, Reece Robson, and Tom Dearden, but I did end up going with their 5'8". He has spent most of the season paired with Chad Townsend in the halves, but over the last month or so they have moved Clifford into that role, and he's been very impressive. Dearden has certainly coped with that change very well in the back end of the year, and the key for him is just continuing to consistently do that if the Cowboys are to make a push deep into this final series. And you look at their best 17 and it is just really impressive. You got Scott Drinkwater at the back, Kyle Felt and Viliami Vailea on one side, Valentine Holmes and Murray Talangi on the other, Tom Dearden and, as I mentioned, Jake Clifford in the halves, Jordan McLean and Jason Taumalolo paired in the front row with Reece Robson at hooker. The back rowers, Hylam Lukey and Jeremiah Nane, are brilliant in their own right, with Ruben Cotter lining up at lock. Then on the bench, normally in that number 14 role, I'd want Jake Granville there as cover, but he is injured at the moment and won't be back until the end of the year. So I've got Sam McIntyre, who is relatively capable of being a bit versatile, Griffin Neame, Thomas McKaylee, and Harrison Edwards, who himself has started the game at hooker this year. This is a side who I expect to win relatively comfortably in week 1 of the finals, and whichever top 4 side ends up playing them the week after is going to be in for a real test against this team. My concern is whether they have the consistency to go all the way and win it, but if they do pick up a couple of results and make a preliminary final, I think that's a pretty good year. Then in 6th place, I've got the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs, a side who I think have sort of been the darlings of 2024. They've been the feel-good story that the neutral has sort of got behind. Their crowds have been absolutely brilliant, and for the most part of this season, their team has absolutely repaid that support. They'll probably be a bit disappointed to finish in 6th, given how much time this season they've spent in and around the top 4. But this is a side that has ended an 8-year finals drought for the Bulldogs, so I think they'll take what they can get. Their key man is a player who was out injured last week, and it showed. It was Matt Burton. He was brought to the Bulldogs in order to be the future of the club, the man that they build around in order to achieve long-term success. Now he's got them there, and while this is a relatively young side that I think will continue to improve in years to come, this is the time where Burton has to be delivering. They'll have a very tough test in week 1 against the Sea Eagles, a side who they lost to at that very same venue only a couple of weeks ago. Burton's going to have to take the contest by the scruff of the neck and make sure that his Bulldogs do not exit the finals at the earliest opportunity. For their best 17, I've got Connor Tracy at fullback, Jacob Kiraz and Stephen Crichton partner on one edge with the two speedsters Bronson Sherry and Josh Adokar on the other. Matt Burton and Toby Sexton are in the halves. Max King and Samuel Hughes make up the front row with Reid Marnie at hooker. The back row is Viliami Kikau and Jacob Preston with Jamin Salmon at lock. For their utility on the bench, it's one of my favourite players in the NRL in Bailey Hayward, with a forward rotation of Curtis Morin, Harry Hayes and Josh Curran. I think their week 1 clash against Manly is very much a 50-50 fixture, but it would be disappointing to see this side go out so early given how much promise they've shown this season. Then in 7th, it is that side, the Manly Warringah Sea Eagles. They are a side that's pulled off a number of very high profile wins this year against the likes of the Storm, Panthers and Roosters, but it's doing that on a consistent basis that has been their Achilles heel. Getting straight into it, their key man is obviously Tom Trbojevic. His absence was felt in a big way in the final round loss against the Sharks. Not only will the Sea Eagles need him to be there in the final series, but they'll need him to be near his best if they want to be consistently beating the best sides in this competition. They're not a one-man show. They've got the likes of Daly, Cherry Evans, Hamole Olakau'atu and Jake Trbojevic, but Tom is obviously the key to their success. Looking at their best 17, I think it is pretty consistently good. You've got obviously Tom Trbojevic at the back. I've got Jason Saab and Tolutau Kola pairing on one edge, although there is an injury cloud over Jason Saab. Anthony Seibold is not sure when he'll be back. If Saab isn't there, I just slot Tommy Talau onto that wing, pretty easy. Ruben Garrick and Lehigh Hopewadi partner on the other edge. Then you got Luke Brooks and DCE in the halves with a front row of Taniela Paseka and Matthew Lodge. Lachlan Croker will start at hooker. Hamole Olakau'atu and Carl Lawton will be in the back row with Jake Trbojevic starting at lock. And a 4-forward bench of Ben Trbojevic, Josh Alloy, Ethan Bullymore and the hard-hitting Nathan Brown. I've thought for a number of weeks now that if you want a dark horse side in this competition, it is the Manly Sea Eagles. But as I said, their week 1 game against the Bulldogs is 50-50, so if they exit in week 1, that's also equally not so surprising. And lastly, in 8th place, off the back of beating the Dolphins in the game to make the finals, it is the Newcastle Knights. They're very much a side who was here against the odds. The general consensus was that you would need 13 wins to make the finals this year, and they only have a record of 12-12. But that middle of the competition was so tight, and they are the team that has benefited from that. They face a super tough test in week 1 against the Cowboys, so how far they go in this competition is something I have doubts over. But if they are to make an imprint, it is obviously off the back of their star man, Kalyn Ponga. The fullback was absolutely instrumental in beating the Dolphins, setting up a couple of tries through his absolutely dazzling footwork. He's obviously a former Cowboy himself, so he would love to knock out the side that he left in order to become the talisman for the Newcastle Knights. In terms of their best 17, it is pretty much just the side that they've named over the past couple of weeks with a couple of players returning from injury. You've got Kalyn Ponga at fullback, Fletcher Sharp and Dane Gagai on one edge, Bradman Best and Greg Marju on the other. Halves combination of Jack Cogger and Phoenix Crossland. Daniel Saifiti will partner Leo Thompson in the front row with Jaden Brayley starting at hooker. Tyson Frizzell and Dylan Lucas make up the back row with Adam Elliott at lock. Then a bench of utility, Tyson Gamble, Matt Croker will make the bench in my opinion, alongside the two returning forwards in Jacob Saifiti and Kai Pearce-Paul. As I said, to me, the Knights making the finals this year is in itself a pass mark, although I think that they will be thinking differently internally there. I can't back them to beat the Cowboys in week 1, but I'm not ruling that out as a possibility by any means. This side is dangerous and absolutely has points in it. So those are the 8 teams that we've got left, and without further ado, here is how I reckon it's all going to play out, presented on a graphic that I blatantly stole off r/NRL. To start with, I've got the Storm beating the Sharks at home in week 1, with the Cowboys beating the Knights as well up in Townsville. Bulldogs and Sea Eagles is super tight, but I reckon Manly have that bit more finals experience that will just about get them over the line in an upset. Then I've got the Panthers most likely beating the Roosters at home, although that result will be heavily impacted by whether Nathan Cleary is fit to return or not. Then I'll see the Sharks playing Cowboys in week 2, two sides who seem to have a bit of a habit of running into each other in the finals. And while that'll be an absolute belter of a game, I just barely back the Sharks to end their finals curse and get the win. Roosters will then play Manly, and I'm going to say that they do get the job done there given how well they shut down Turbo last time those sides played. So then Roosters will progress to play Storm in Melbourne in a prelim, which I just can't see them getting a result in. Melbourne will be too rested, too good, and they will progress to the final. The other prelim will be Panthers and Sharks, and in much the same story, I backed the higher ranked side off the back of a week's rest to get the job done. That leaves us with the grand final of Storm versus Panthers, the two best sides in this competition. And while I do think the Panthers will be favourites coming into this game, I reckon we see a repeat of the 2020 grand final and Melbourne will get the job done to become premiers. There we have it. There's your rundown for the 2024 final series. Let me know what your predictions are in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.